He's the kind of man who opens doors, remembers your favorite song, and would rather swallow his pride than raise his voice, raised on respect. He believes in calm conversations, not control. He's the gentle giant who swore he'd never become the angry type. But give him 6 months with the wrong woman, and you'll witness a transformation so subtle yet brutal, it rivals Jekyll and Hyde. That patient voice turns sharp. That calm spirit becomes volatile. That loving man, resentful, exhausted, and unrecognizable. This isn't just about anger. It's about conditioning how good men are trained to abandon their values just to be heard. If you've ever felt this shift in yourself or seen it in a friend like this video, subscribe and hit the bell. What you learn next might save a man's soul. One problem statement. Here's the part that shatters everything you thought you knew about relationships. The truth. He didn't just turn angry one day. He was shaped slowly, subtly by a dynamic that neither of them could see. Not because she meant harm, but because human behavior adapts to what gets results. Without realizing it, she trained him to abandon patience and embrace intensity. This isn't about blame. It's about awareness. Every relationship becomes a silent feedback loop. Her reactions reinforce some behaviors, while ignoring others. Without knowing it, she becomes the one guiding the tone. And without understanding it, he becomes the one adjusting to survive. Over time, his respectful words vanish into silence. His patience is met with indifference, until one day he raises his voice. And for the first time, she hears him. That's the moment the cycle begins. Because in that moment, his mind learns a dangerous lesson. Respect is invisible. Anger works. From there, it's no longer a partnership. It's a behavioral experiment. And neither one of them knows who they're becoming. 2. Stoic analysis. This is where it begins, not with shouting, not with aggression, but with quiet observation. The patient man sees something that doesn't sit right with him. Maybe she brushes off his ideas in public. Maybe she's always late, or flirts a little too freely. Maybe she makes choices that affect them both without ever asking. Being a man of calm reason, he doesn't explode. He speaks gently, directly, like he was taught. I noticed something last night. You interrupted me multiple times. It made me feel dismissed. But she doesn't listen. Or worse, she deflects. You're overreacting. That's not what happened. Are you trying to control me? His respectful approach hits a wall of denial and avoidance, but he doesn't give up. Not yet. He tries again, different tone, different words. A better time. He focuses on how he feels instead of what she did. He speaks without blame. Only clarity. And still nothing. Dismissed. Ignored. Diminished. This is the silent moment when something dangerous starts forming. He's learning, without realizing it, that calm communication is useless here. That his values composure, empathy, mutual respect carry no weight in this dynamic. This is how a good man gets reprogrammed, not with force, but with silence, not with cruelty, but with indifference. And so, his mind begins searching. If kindness fails, what works? He tries being more assertive. Not change. He raises the seriousness, still brushed aside. He repeats himself with more emphasis, hoping repetition might finally matter. Still, she doesn't engage. And then, slowly, his brain does what all human brains are wired to do. It searches for what gets results. It starts what we call the escalation loop. He doesn't want to yell. He doesn't want to be that guy. So he experiments. He's funnier, more affectionate, more strategic. He speaks at different times, in different places, with softer tone, sharper tone, no tone at all. He rewrites himself over and over, hoping one version of him will finally be heard. But her indifference creates a closed system, a system where only emotional intensity gets through. So one day, after exhausting every other option, he raises his voice, not out of rage, but exhaustion. And for the first time, she responds. She listens. She acknowledges. Maybe she even says she's sorry. And in that one moment, she doesn't just validate the issue. She validates the anger. Unknowingly, she reinforces the exact behavior she claims to despise. She teaches him without ever meaning to that calm words are invisible, but anger is power. Now the damage is done. The man who once prided himself on composure begins to associate self-control with failure. He no longer trusts softness. He no longer believes patience works. He begins to reach for anger, not because he enjoys it, but because it's the only language that breaks her silence. This is not just a personal loss, it's a philosophical tragedy. Because a man's ability to remain calm in the face of frustration is the cornerstone of Stoic strength. But when that calm is constantly punished with indifference, and anger is rewarded with results, he's not just losing his temper, he's losing his compass. He's not becoming who he is. He's becoming what the system trained him to be. 3 crossroads. There comes a point when the patient man realizes something painful. His calm voice is only heard when it turns sharp. His gentle approach is only noticed when it breaks. And that realization cracks something inside him. He's been trying for months, maybe years, to make his principles work, to be respectful, to be rational, to be good. But now, he sees the truth. In this relationship, patience is punished, and only intensity gets results. It doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, subtle, insidious. He begins to see a pattern. When he speaks with clarity, he's dismissed. When he shows restraint, he's ignored. But when he finally raises his voice, even just once, she reacts. She listens. And for the first time, he's faced with a reality that shakes his sense of self. He stands at a crossroads. 3 paths lie before him. Each one leads to a different version of the man he will become. And the choice he makes here will define not just this relationship, but the shape of his character for years to come. Path 1. The anger trap. This is the path most men stumble into. Not because they want to, but because they're tired. Tired of repeating themselves. Tired of being kind and getting silence in return. Tired of watching their integrity fall on deaf ears. At first, anger was a last resort. Now, it's becoming familiar. Then habitual. Then expected. He learns to lead with volume instead of vulnerability, force instead of finesse, intensity instead of insight, and slowly, his identity starts to erode. He becomes someone he never thought he'd be, a man who uses aggression not to harm, but just to be heard. This isn't anger addiction in the traditional sense. He's not addicted to rage. He's addicted to the results it gives him, to the momentary power, to the acknowledgement, to finally feeling like he matters. But this path extracts a heavy toll. Internally, he's ashamed. He watches himself from the outside, becoming the kind of man he once judged. He remembers who he used to be, measured, composed, proud of his restraint. And now, he feels trapped, because the man he became is the only one she seems to respond to. He knows this isn't who he is, but he doesn't know how to go back. Path 2, the silent disappearance. Then there's the second road, the one that isn't loud. But quiet, the internal collapse. Some men, horrified by what anger brings out of them, choose to disappear emotionally rather than become someone they hate. They stop bringing up their needs, stop setting boundaries, stop expecting to be understood. They stay physically, but vanish emotionally. They withdraw into themselves. They become quiet, disconnected, resigned. They're not at peace, they're at war with their own silence. Psychologists call this learned helplessness, a state where you convince yourself that nothing you do matters. So you do nothing. These men surrender their voice for the illusion of harmony. They trade self-respect for her temporary approval. They think they're avoiding conflict, but really, they're avoiding themselves. The problems don't go away. They just sink deeper. The resentment doesn't vanish. It calcifies. Eventually, these men become passive-aggressive, unpredictable, or numb, not because they're cold, but because they're exhausted. And perhaps the greatest tragedy of this path is that, over time, they forget what they even wanted to say in the first place. Path 3, the conscious exit then. There's the third path, the one rarely taken, but the one that leads to freedom. This is the path of clarity, of discipline, of self-preservation. Some patient men recognize the conditioning process for what it is. They realize this isn't a communication problem. This is a value system conflict. They understand that a woman who only responds to anger is not compatible with a man who values composure, no matter how much love there is. If the dynamic itself erodes character, the price is too high. So they leave, not in rage, not in vengeance, but in silence with a clear mind and a steady heart. They don't leave because they gave up. They leave because they refuse to become someone they don't respect. They understand that any relationship that forces you to betray yourself in order to keep it alive is already broken. This path is the most stoic of all, because it requires the one thing most people avoid: letting go of what you cannot control. The philosophy beneath the pain. This crossroads is not just about behavior. It's about identity. What kind of man are you willing to become just to be acknowledged? Will you trade your values for validation? Will you abandon your principles for peace? Or will you choose the harder path of solitude, honesty, and self-respect? Stoicism teaches us that we are not what happens to us, we are how we choose to respond. These three paths aren't just options. They are mirrors, and each one reflects the level of awareness a man has of himself. Anger may get you hurt. Silence may keep the peace. But only clarity will protect your soul. 4. Consequences and warning. To truly grasp how a patient man slowly transforms, we must look beyond surface-level reactions and examine the deeper psychological conditioning that rewires his behavior. It doesn't begin with malice. It begins with neglect. This isn't a deliberate plan to mold a man into someone angry or unstable. Instead, it's a subtle, repeated pattern, one that slowly teaches him that the calm voice of reason isn't powerful enough to be heard. And it all starts with what I call emotional filtering, when a man speaks softly, respectfully, even vulnerably. It doesn't register as urgent. It sounds optional, something that can be delayed, dismissed, or ignored. But when frustration finally breaks through, when his tone shifts, and his voice tightens suddenly. She listens, not because the issue has changed, but because the emotional volume has. This difference in emotional response becomes a form of unintentional reinforcement. The man begins to notice respectful talk achieves little, anger, however, produces immediate reaction. His emotional brain, designed to recognize reward systems, logs this pattern, and without conscious intention, he begins shifting toward intensity because that's the only time he feels heard. Over time, this repeated feedback loop creates what I call emotional escalation conditioning. He doesn't want to raise his voice. He fights it. He resists it. But his nervous system is being reprogrammed. Quiet is ineffective. Calm is ignored. Respect gets dismissed. So the volume goes up, not out of desire, but out of survival. And what happens next is devastating. Every time he gets a response, only when he's upset, it erodes something sacred, mutual respect. When calm, he's invisible. When angry, he's seen. And so his identity starts to split. He's no longer the man he once admired in the mirror. He becomes someone forced to communicate in ways he once judged in others. This isn't just a communication breakdown, it's the slow death of his core values. He begins to ask himself painful questions. Why does she only respond to me when I'm loud? Does my patience mean nothing to her? Am I becoming someone I hate just to be acknowledged? Meanwhile, she fails to connect the dots. She sees a man who's always angry, but doesn't realize she trained him to speak in rage. She forgets the dozens of calm conversations that went nowhere. In her eyes, he has changed. In his, he was forced to. This mismatch in perception leads to mutual loss of respect. He resents that he must shout to matter. She resents being shouted at. And neither one recognizes how their behavior is reinforcing the other. What forms is a toxic emotional economy where respectful communication is devalued, and volatility is the only currency with real purchasing power. He starts to doubt whether she values his opinions at all. Unless they're wrapped in fury, she begins to question his temperament, labeling him as controlling or emotionally unstable, unaware that her indifference carved that instability into him. This is where many relationships collapse, not from infidelity, not from major betrayal, but from a consistent failure to honor the voice of calm communication. It's a tragic cycle, not because either person is inherently cruel, but because neither understands the emotional training they've imposed on each other. The awakening comes the day he sees the full pattern, not just her behavior, but his. Not just her dismissals, but his reactions. And with that awareness comes the power to make a choice. Stay in a system that forces him to abandon his values, or step back, reclaim his emotional integrity, and rebuild his voice in a place where respect doesn't have to be shouted. 5. Philosophical conclusion. There exists a psychological paradox that uniquely haunts patient men, especially those committed to growth, respect, and emotional maturity. These men enter relationships with the belief that calm, open communication is the bedrock of love. They believe that raising their voice is wrong, that losing control is a failure, that real men solve conflict through patience, logic, and emotional composure. But what happens when those very values are rendered ineffective? What happens when the man most dedicated to non-violence, to harmony, and to understanding finds himself consistently ignored unless he raises his voice? This is not just a personal dilemma, it's a societal contradiction. a contradiction that Stoic men must learn to recognize, not through bitterness, but through clarity. Society has long trained men to suppress their aggression, rightfully so in many contexts. We've labeled shouting, dominance, and intensity as red flags for toxicity. We've told men, control yourself, be calm, be kind. But simultaneously, these same men are entering relationships where calmness is not rewarded, it's overlooked, where kindness is interpreted as weakness, where restraint is mistaken for indifference. This is the cruel setup. The man who refuses to escalate finds his words falling into silence. The man who finally snaps sees results, and suddenly, he's trapped in a moral dilemma. Be calm and be dismissed, or get angry and be heard. To a Stoic, this dynamic is poison. Why? Because it corrupts the very core of who he strives to be. It teaches him that becoming reactive is necessary, that shedding his restraint is the price he must pay to matter. And over time, the man who once practiced stillness becomes someone who confuses force with effectiveness. The damage here isn't just relational, it's philosophical. His core virtues are under siege. This transformation doesn't happen all at once. It's slow, subtle. At first, he thinks he's just being firm. Later, being assertive. But eventually, he starts using anger as a tool, not because he enjoys it, but because nothing else worked. And every time it works, he reinforces the very behavior that disgusts him. He starts thinking, maybe I am too passive. Maybe I need to be more dominant. Maybe this is how men are supposed to behave. But Stoicism reminds us you are not what the world demands of you. You are what you demand of yourself. A Stoic man is not defined by outcomes, he is defined by internal mastery. He doesn't escalate because others won't listen. He doesn't compromise his character for momentary results. Instead, he confronts the truth. If being myself respectful, composed, honest does not earn mutual respect, then I am in the wrong environment. That is not weakness. That is strength. Walking away from a dynamic that punishes your peace is not abandonment, it's self-respect. Now, many women involved in these dynamics aren't malicious. They don't consciously ignore calm men. Their nervous system simply reacts to intensity. In a world full of noise and constant demands on their attention, emotional urgency cuts through where gentleness is filtered out. But that doesn't make it right. And it doesn't mean you should adapt to it. It means you must see it clearly and act accordingly. The patient man, when trained through repetition that calmness yields nothing, begins to associate his identity with ineffectiveness. He starts to think, maybe I don't matter unless I raise my voice. Maybe this is why women respond to the loudest men. But this is a lie. Women may react to loudness, but they respect consistency, integrity, grounded leadership, not volume. If a woman only responds to crisis, then she is addicted to chaos. And you, as a man of philosophy and principle, must never feed that addiction. Let her meet her own noise. You stay still. Let her test your limits. You define your standards. Let her ignore your calmness. You show her the exit. Stoicism does not ask you to be passive. It asks you to be principled. And sometimes, principle means detaching not out of spite, but out of alignment, because here's the truth that most men learn too late. You can't build peace with someone who only understands war. You can't build trust in an environment where respect is only offered in reaction to raised voices. And no matter how patient you are, no matter how refined your words are, If a woman has trained herself to tune out your calm presence, she will inevitably destroy the foundation of the relationship. But this is where the Stoic man reclaims his power, not through anger, not through aggression, but through departure. He does not yell. He does not punish. He simply walks, because nothing is louder than silence from a man who once gave his all. When you walk away without hatred, without theatrics, without explanation, you deliver the final lesson. I will not participate in a dynamic that turns me into someone I am not. That is not failure. That is ascension. That is the moment the patient man becomes the Stoic man. He no longer tolerates disrespect disguised as forgetfulness. He no longer rationalizes ignorance as just how she is. He no longer tries to teach someone who refuses to learn. Instead, he steps into the rarest form of masculine power, the kind that doesn't need to be loud to be felt, the kind that doesn't need validation to know its worth. It is the power of self-command, of letting go without needing to be right, of refusing to become a monster just because the world rewards monstrous behavior. The modern world does not need more angry men. It needs more men who know how to choose peace, even if it costs them connection. It needs more men who will not abandon their values to be heard. The Stoic man stands alone if he must. He speaks with clarity, not volume. He leads through principle, not pressure. And if a relationship demands that he abandon that path to maintain intimacy, he knows that's not love. That's dependence wrapped in dysfunction. So what's the ultimate conclusion? You are not here to fix her patterns. You are not here to prove your calmness. You are here to live with honor. And honor means, if your truth is ignored, you don't shout louder. You walk quieter. Let your absence teach the lesson your words could not. Understanding this emotional pattern between men and women isn't about blame, it's about awakening. It's about seeing clearly how, without even realizing it, we sometimes teach others to abandon their best selves just to get noticed. For women, it starts with awareness. When a man speaks with calm and respect, and you only respond when his voice is raised, what message are you truly sending? That his patience is weakness, that anger is the only way he earns your attention. That's not empowerment. That's miseducation. When a man asks gently, "Please text me when you're late," and you dismiss it, you teach him that emotional composure is disposable. But when he finally erupts in frustration and you respond immediately, it conditions both of you, not toward love, not towards respect, but towards survival-based interaction. And for men, the lesson is even heavier. Because the patient man, the one who tries to solve things with clarity and maturity, is being slowly conditioned to believe that calm doesn't work, that his core values, honor, kindness, thoughtful leadership are useless in relationships, that only when he becomes loud, frustrated, or confrontational does he earn validation. This is how character erosion begins, not in a moment of weakness, but in 100 small moments of being ignored. A gentle request unanswered, a soft boundary crossed, a respectful conversation that leads to silence, until one day, that man no longer recognizes himself in the mirror. He sees someone angrier, colder, more reactive, someone shaped by necessity, not choice. But there is a better path, and it begins by setting boundaries early, by saying, "I prefer respectful dialogue, and if that can't exist between us, then maybe we're not compatible." That isn't weakness. That's strength. That's clarity. That's wisdom. Because here's the question every patient man eventually has to answer. Will you stay true to your principles? even if it means losing someone who doesn't respect them? Or will you abandon your values to keep someone who only hears you when you shout? That's the real crossroads, not between anger and silence, but between self-respect and self-betrayal. And for women who genuinely desire emotionally grounded men, there's a responsibility to respond to patience before it turns to pain. Validate the calm voice before it cracks. Because if you only listen when he's angry, don't be surprised when anger becomes his language. This dynamic isn't just emotional, it's cultural. We live in a world that constantly punishes restraint and rewards noise, where emotional drama gets the spotlight, while emotional strength gets ignored. But if we want healthier relationships, deeper bonds, we must reverse this equation. Respect should not require volume, and patience should not be punished with indifference. So to the patient men listening right now, don't let this world, or any woman, convince you that your calm nature is a flaw. It is your greatest strength, but only when you protect it. Only when you walk away from those who demand you become someone you're not, just to feel heard. To the women, don't wait until he snaps to hear him. Don't condition good men into becoming angry ones. If you say you want mature communication, prove it by responding to it when it's offered, not after it's been pushed to the breaking point. Because once a man learns that his anger is his only tool, he might use it in every area of life. And the man who once embodied peace becomes a stranger to himself. If this message resonated with you, if it revealed a truth you've lived but couldn't explain, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. Your voice might help another man or woman recognize the pattern before it's too late. And if you believe more people need to hear this truth, hit that like button. Subscribe to the Stoic Spirit for deeper insights into masculine power, emotional discipline, and relationship truth. Tap the bell so you don't miss the next video, because the fight to stay true to yourself is the battle Stoic men never stop fighting.